Welcome to this DAX for Power BI tutorial. In this part of the series, we're going to cover the LookupValue function. We'll start by importing multiple tables into a data model without creating relationships between them, and then look at how you can use the LookupValue function to retrieve information based on a common field in those different tables. We'll look at how you can nest LookupValue functions to look up across a chain of tables, and also show you how you can use the LookupValue function to match on multiple columns and also to look up values in the same table. So let's get started. To get started, I've created a new blank report, and as usual the first thing I'll do is choose to import some data from an Excel workbook. I'll drop a link in the video description so you can download this movies file yourself. For now, I'm just going to double click on the file to open up the import wizard. Once this appears on screen, I'm going to select all four tables from the movies workbook. I'll start by selecting country, hold down the shift key and select region, and then click the load button to import all four tables into the data model. Now that that's finished, I'm going to have a look at the data we've imported by selecting the data button on the left hand side of the screen. Then I'm going to select the film table on the right hand side, just to demonstrate that some tables contain columns which would allow us to create relationships between other tables in the same model. For example, the film table contains a country ID column showing the ID number of the country in which the film was made. So Jurassic Park and many other films were made in country ID number 241. If I wanted to know which country that was, I can head over to the country table, look up the number 241 and find that that corresponds to the United States, of course. Each country in the country table also contains the ID number of the world region to which it belongs. And if I wanted to know the name of that world region, I could take the number 2 from here, head to the region table, look up the number 2 in the region ID column and find that that corresponds to America. Now, we had a similar arrangement in the previous video, and in that video we explained how you could create relationships between these tables to make it easy to retrieve information from multiple different tables at the same time. In this video, however, if we head over to the model view, we'll find that none of the tables have got relationships created between them automatically. The reason for that is simply because I ensured that the column names between these different tables were different enough that Power BI didn't automatically create any relationships. So in the film table I've got a country ID column, but in the country table I've named it as ID of country. Now of course there's nothing to stop us from manually creating a relationship. I could click and drag to connect the ID of country column to the country ID column in the film table. And because the data types of those columns match and there's a unique value in the ID of country in the country table and duplicated values in the country ID column in the film table, that relationship will happily create itself. But that's not what I want to do in this particular video. If I delete that relationship that I've just created and confirm that I want to do that, and then I'm just going to find my region table and position that to the left hand side of the country table. In this video, I'd like to look at how we could retrieve the country name from the country table into the film table without any relationship between those tables at all. And this is where the LookupValue function comes in handy. So let's head back to the data view and make sure that we're looking at the film table, and then insert a new column so that we can calculate the country name for each film. I'll just zoom in the formula bar by holding the Control key and rolling the mouse wheel forwards. Let's call this new column country name and make this equal to the result of the LookupValue function. Now you may notice a slight difference in the appearance of the IntelliSense compared to previous videos in this series, simply because the most recent update to Power BI Desktop has changed the way the IntelliSense looks and behaves. There are some improvements and there's a couple of irritating things about it as well, as you're about to see. Anyway, with the LookupValue function highlighted, I can hit the Tab key on my keyboard to insert the rest of the function name and open up the round brackets. I'll then press Shift and Enter to throw a new line in the formula bar. What I'd expect to see at this point is the list of parameters for the LookupValue function. In the previous version of the IntelliSense, that would have happened automatically, but for some reason with this version of the IntelliSense, I've got to type in a comma and then backspace off the comma to get the tooltip to appear. So you can see that I've got three compulsory parameters for LookupValue: the result column name, the search column name 1, and search value 1. So the result column name is the name of the column in a table which contains the value I want to return, and that's going to be the name of the country from the country table. So I can find the country column, hit the tab key to type the rest of that in, and then a comma, shift and enter, and then have a look for the next parameter, which is search column name 1. So this is the name of the column in the same table as the result column name, which contains the value we're trying to find a match for. So that's going to be the country ID. So I can start typing in country, look for country ID of country, followed by a comma, and then shift and enter again. So the final compulsory parameter is search value 1, and that's the value that we're trying to find our match for in the lookup table. So here we're trying to look up the country ID, we're searching for the country ID. So I'm going to go for the film table, and then the country ID column in there. Shift and enter and then close the round brackets, and when I press enter, that will then calculate the country name by looking up the ID of the country based on the film's country ID to retrieve the relevant country name. Now it's possible that the LookupValue function won't be able to find a match for the item you're looking for, and in that case the function will return a blank. If we click on the drop-down arrow next to the country name column we've just created, we'll find that there's a blank item in this list. So if we want to see why that's the case, we could filter this list to show only the blanks, and find that there's one single film, No Country for Old Men, which doesn't have a country ID in the country ID column. So because the LookupValue function couldn't return a match for that country ID, it returned a blank as its result. Now if you prefer to see an actual value appear, like a placeholder or default value appear when a match can't be found, you can use one of the optional parameters of the LookupValue function. If I head back to the formula bar and type in a comma after I've referenced the film country ID, you can see that there's an alternate result parameter. So I'm going to specify here no country found, or something along those lines. And then when I hit enter, we'll find that any film whose country cannot be found returns no country found, so we won't find any blanks anymore in that list, but we will find there's a no country found option, and that corresponds to No Country for Old Men. So I can remove that filter just to return all of the films again, and there we go. So we've successfully retrieved the country name. Now let's say we wanted to retrieve the region name for each film as well. In order to do that, we'd have to look up the country ID in the country table to retrieve the world region ID for that country, and then look up the world region ID in the region table to finally retrieve the region name. So we can do this in a couple of ways. We could break this down into two separate columns to retrieve the world region ID first, and then use that to retrieve the region, or we could just nest one LookupValue function inside another. So let's head back to the data view, and in the film table we'll create a new column, and we'll call this one, let's call this one region name, and we'll make this one equal to LookupValue. And the thing we're going to try to return is going to be the region column. We're going to do that by trying to match a value in the region ID column, and the value we're going to use to match in the region ID column is going to be taken from another LookupValue function. So this one is going to try to retrieve the country world region ID by matching on the country ID of country, and the value we're going to use to try to retrieve that is going to be the film country ID. So we can close two sets of round brackets. Finally the IntelliSense disappears and stops masking all the code I've typed in. So hopefully you can see there fairly clearly what's going on. And if I hit enter to create that formula, we should then return the region name for each individual film. And of course we'll end up with another blank entry because there was one film that didn't have any country ID in the first place. So the same film, No Country for Old Men, has no country and also no region. We could use the alternate result parameter of the outer LookupValue function to return no region found for that particular film, but I'm happy that we've seen an example of that already. So let's just clear the filter from that column and bring everything back. So all this works, of course, but it is an awful lot of effort when it would have been far simpler for this particular example just to create the relationships between the tables. Just as a very quick reminder of something we did in the previous video, I'm going to create relationships between the country ID of the film table and the ID of country in the country table, and then the world region ID of country to the region ID of the region table. So you can do that just by clicking and dragging, as I've just shown there. And then if I head back to the film table, and an alternative way to retrieve the region name would have simply been to use the related function. So if I create a new column, and I'll call this one region related, equals, and then use the related function to retrieve the region. So all the effort we went to with the nested lookup function, we could have achieved in a much simpler way just by creating that basic relationship. So if relationships are so much more convenient and in fact more efficient, why would you choose to use a LookupValue function in the first place? Well, one situation in which it comes in quite handy is when you want to look up a value in different tables based on matching values in multiple columns. In the film table, we've got the director's first name and family name, and the corresponding columns also exist in the director table. So let's say we wanted to retrieve the director's date of birth into the film table by matching values on both first name and family name. Of course, it wouldn't be sufficient to create a relationship between the first name column here in the film table and the first name column in the director table, because there are many directors who share the same first name. In fact, if we tried to do that, we'd get a warning about creating something called a many-to-many relationship. So we can see that there's a single Stephen sitting here at the top of my list of films, Stephen having directed Jurassic Park, but I'm also likely to find multiple Stephens in the list of first names in the director table. Now I can proceed with this, ignoring all the warnings. I can happily create a many-to-many relationship between these two tables. But I need to be aware of lots of different behaviour in a many-to-many relationship compared to a one-to-many relationship that I'm not going to get into the details of right now. I'd then have to create a second relationship between the family name columns to make sure that I could match a value on both columns and I'll get the same warning. So for example, it's quite likely I've got multiple Smiths in my list of director names, but I can ignore the warnings again and click OK to create that second relationship. But then I run into another problem. As well as having many-to-many relationships which behave differently, I can also only have one relationship between two tables active at any one time. So you might be able to make out the dotted line here indicating that this second relationship I've created is inactive. Now I can change the activeness of a relationship by right-clicking on it and choosing to view its properties, and I could deactivate one relationship and then make the second one active instead. But only one of those can be active at any one time. So clearly this is no good. I'm going to delete these two relationships. We can't achieve what we want here using relationships between the tables. What we need to do instead is head back into the data view of our film table and create a new column which will allow us to retrieve the director's date of birth. So let's call this one director DOB, and I'll make this one equal to LookupValue. The thing I'm trying to return is the director's DOB field, and I'm going to try to return that by matching a value in, let's say first of all, the director's first name field. If I then type in a comma, I can say that I'm going to try to find a match there by looking for the film director first name. Now at this point, if I close the round brackets and hit enter, I'm going to return an error for the LookupValue function. And the error is caused by returning a list of multiple values when we're expecting only to return a single one. So as we said, there's a many-to-many relationship between the first names in the film table and the first names in the director table. Because there are multiple Stephens and probably multiple Sams and maybe multiple Brians as well, we're returning a list of multiple values, and I can't display those multiple values next to each individual director or each individual film. So if we go back to the list of parameters for this function, add a comma after the film's director first name, then we can say we also want to try to find a match in the director family name column and look for a value in the film table, director family name. And then if we hit enter now, we should find that the combination of first name and family name for each director returns a unique result for each individual person. So we get the list of directors' dates of births returned to the film table. One final example of where the lookup value comes in handy is when you want to retrieve a value from the same table as the item you're trying to find a match for. So in this example in the film table, we've got a column called Previous Film ID. And this contains for certain films the ID number of the film which preceded it in the same series. So if I click on the drop down arrow here to filter this and just remove the blanks from the previous film ID, you can hopefully see that we're essentially creating a sequence of films in different series. So we've got Star Trek, we've got Star Wars, Harry Potter, etc. Now what I want to be able to do is look up the ID number for each previous film so that, say, I could return the box office value, the box office dollars. So I could check then whether the next film in the series made more or less money than the previous one. Now in order to make this work, I can't create a relationship between the previous film ID and the film ID fields. If I try to do that in the relationships view or the model view, you find you can't create a relationship between two fields in the same table. So let's go back to the data view and let's create a new column. And what I want to do is let's just try to return the previous film's box office. So we'll say previous film box office for the column name, and we'll make this one equal to lookup value, and we'll say film box office dollars. Now I want to do that by retrieving or looking up a value in the film ID column, so we'll say film ID, and then I want to find a match using the film previous film ID. So if I then close the round brackets and hit enter, we should find that for films for which I can find their previous ID, I get the box office takings for that film. Next, I'd like to change the formula so that it doesn't just show the value of the previous film's box office, but it shows the difference between this film and the previous film's box office. And to do that, I can simply subtract the result of the lookup value function from the film box office dollars field. So film box office dollars minus then the result of the lookup value function. Now this is going to cause a small problem for films which don't have a previous film in the series. If I enter that formula, the blank returned by the lookup value function will be treated as a 0. So we'll see that for the first film in each series, it just shows us the value of the box office dollars field, which isn't quite what I want. So I'm going to take the opportunity to add an if function to control exactly which result we return. So if the film previous film ID field is equal to 0, that will also include the blanks, by the way, for any films which don't have any value at all in the previous film ID. We can return a 0, otherwise we can return the result of this expression here, and then add the final closing round brackets at the end. And then any films which begin a series will just have a 0 for their previous film box office, which now of course should probably be renamed to say box office versus previous film, perhaps. Let's just change that so it makes a little bit more sense as we read it. So box office versus previous film. Okay, so there we go. There's the final result of the formula. Now that we've gone to the effort of creating this expression, we could show its results in a visualization in the report view. So let's head into the report view and let's insert just a basic table. In that table, I'm going to insert the film's title. I'll add in the release date just to allow me to sort the results, and I want to see it displayed as a date rather than the dates hierarchy. So in the drop-down list next to the release date field, I can change this to show the release date. And then I can show the box office dollars, and then the box office versus previous film. And then if I just resize the table, that will make things look a little more sensible. There we go. Now at the moment I'm showing a list of all the films in the database, and I want to show only those films in a particular series which had a previous film. So to enable that, I'm going to click into a blank part of the report page and insert a slicer. And then in the slicer I'm going to insert the series field. So this allows me to filter, say, for Star Trek films or Star Wars films, etc. Now at the moment they're not sorted by date, they're sorted alphabetically. So I'm going to change the sorting of that table to sort in ascending order of date, and then we get an idea as to how well each individual film that's released in the series has performed compared to its previous film. That might be a little better to see as some kind of conditional format. So I'm going to go to the box office versus previous film field and right click on that, and then choose conditional formatting, and I'm going to go with a data bar. Here I'm going to show the positive numbers with bright blue bars and then negative numbers with, let's go with this bright orange colour instead. And then I don't want to see the figure either, the actual value for the previous film. So I'm going to check the box to show the bar only and then click OK, so we can see how visually each film has compared with the previous one in its own series. So that's reasonably visually interesting, I think. It might work even better as a column chart or a bar chart, and that's relatively straightforward to do, but I feel like I'm perhaps getting away from the point of the video at this stage. The important thing is using the LookupValue function to retrieve values either from a different table or even from the same table when a relationship won't do the job. Hope you found that one useful. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.